I rushed past the crowded coffee shops and glass-fronted galleries of River North, dodging other pedestrians as I checked my watch. 8 minutes until my presentation to the senior partners. The September wind whipped through the Chicago streets, tugging at my portfolio case as I hurried along the final blocks to Maxwell and Associates. The elevator opened directly onto our firm's reception area, all polished concrete and reclaimed wood, a testament to the sustainable design principles we championed. I smoothed my blazer and gave a quick nod to Diane at the front desk before heading straight to the conference room. "Just in time, Reyes," Marcus Halpern, one of the founding partners, said as I entered. "We were about to start without you." "Sorry, CTA delays," I said, setting up my materials at the front of the room. The truth was, I'd spent the early morning hours refining my presentation, tweaking the renderings until the community garden spaces in my low-income housing complex popped against the brick and steel. For the next 20 minutes, I presented my concept for repurposing an abandoned factory in Pilsen into mixed-income apartments with green spaces and community facilities. The senior partners leaned forward when I detailed how the solar panel installation would reduce energy costs by 40%, making the units more affordable while maintaining profitability for investors. Your attention to both community needs and financial viability continues to impress Samantha, Eliana Vega, the partner who'd taken me under her wing 3 years ago, said after I finished. "I think we should move forward with pitching this to the City Planning Committee." The approval sent a wave of satisfaction through me. At 29, I'd managed to carve out a position at one of Chicago's most progressive architecture firms. My design philosophy, that beautiful, sustainable buildings shouldn't be reserved for those who could afford luxury, had found a home at Maxwell and Associates. My career trajectory pointed steadily upward. 2 weeks later, everything changed. The Museum of Contemporary Art was hosting an exhibition on humanitarian architecture. As someone who designed affordable housing, I'd gone expecting to gather ideas and make professional connections. Instead, I found Julian. His photographs of Syrian refugee settlements lined an entire wall, stark black and white images capturing makeshift homes built from whatever materials people could find. Unlike typical journalistic photos that focused on despair, Julian's images highlighted ingenious solutions: privacy screens fashioned from blankets, cooking areas designed to maximize scarce fuel, communal spaces carved out between tents. "They're architects without training," a voice said beside me. "Necessity breeds remarkable creativity." I turned to find a man studying my reaction to the photos. His hair fell across his forehead in a way that seemed both careless and deliberate. The camera hanging around his neck looked worn from use rather than fashion. "Julian Cross," he said, extending his hand. "These are my photographs." "Samantha Reyes," I replied. "They're extraordinary. You've captured the dignity in these temporary spaces." His eyes lit up. "Exactly what I hoped to convey. Most people see only deprivation." "I see people creating home against impossible odds," I said. That conversation lasted until the museum staff began turning off lights. Julian described his experiences in refugee camps across 3 continents, his voice growing more animated as he outlined his vision for a nonprofit organization that would collaborate with displaced communities to design more effective transitional housing. Most aid organizations drop identical prefab shelters everywhere from Sudan to Myanmar, regardless of climate or cultural needs, Julian explained as we continued our conversation at a nearby cafe. "My goal is creating adaptable designs with input from the people who'll actually live in them." "That's exactly my philosophy with affordable housing here," I said. "Design with people, not for them." The way he looked at me made me feel like he was memorizing every word. "I knew you'd understand. Most people nod politely, but don't really get it." Over the following months, Julian and I met whenever he was in Chicago. He'd return from assignments in Jordan or Lebanon and call me immediately, eager to share what he'd learned and see my latest projects. Our professional collaboration evolved into something more personal. I fell for his passion, how real he seemed, and the way he talked about wanting to make actual differences in people's lives. When we kissed for the first time on the lakefront path, with the city lights shining behind us, it just felt right. We connected on so many levels. 6 months after we met, Julian called from New York with excitement in his voice. "I've got backing for the nonprofit, Sam, initial funding to get us off the ground, but I need a partner who understands both design and community engagement." His words tumbled out. Come to New York. We can do this together. Your affordable housing experience is exactly what this organization needs. I sat on my couch in my Wicker Park apartment, phone pressed to my ear, looking at the life I'd built in Chicago. My drafting table by the window, the plants thriving on my balcony, the framed certificate from my first completed project. My career is here, I said. The partners are considering me for project lead on the riverfront development. That's great, Julian said. But think about the scale of impact we could have together. Your talent designing for a handful of Chicago neighborhoods versus helping establish standards that could improve housing for millions of displaced people worldwide. He painted a compelling picture. The two of us working side by side, traveling to consult on projects, presenting at international conferences, a partnership in every sense. Just think about it, he said before hanging up. For 2 weeks, I did little else. During meetings at Maxwell, my mind wandered to Julian's vision. While sketching building elevations, I found myself designing adaptable housing modules instead. You're not really considering this, are you? Eliana asked when I finally confided in her over lunch. You've spent years building your reputation here. This man wants you to abandon everything for a startup nonprofit that might not survive its first year. It's not just about Julian, I insisted, though her words stung with truth. It's about using my skills where they might make the most difference. And it has nothing to do with those eyes of his you mentioned 3 times last month. Eliana raised an eyebrow. I laughed, but didn't answer directly. I need to at least try. If it doesn't work out, I can always come back to Chicago. Architecture firms aren't revolving doors, Samantha. The riverfront project would have put your name on the map. If you leave now, that opportunity goes to someone else. Despite her warning and similar cautions from other colleagues, I made my decision. I gave notice at Maxwell, subletting my apartment to my friend Tess, and packed only what I'd need immediately. My drafting tools, reference books, and enough clothes to start a new life. My final night in Chicago, I stood on my balcony looking at the city lights. I'd spent my entire professional life here, building a career brick by brick through late nights and early mornings. Now I was leaving it all for a man I'd known less than a year, and a vision that existed primarily in conversations and emails. The magnitude of what I was doing hit me fully on the train to New York. Each mile of track carried me further from certainty towards something undefined. I sketched in my notebook to calm my nerves, designing modular housing units that could be transported easily and assembled without specialized tools. When the train pulled into Grand Central, I gathered my bags with shaking hands. What if this was a terrible mistake? What if Julian and I couldn't translate our shared passion into something concrete? Then I saw him waiting on the platform, his face breaking into a smile as he spotted me through the crowd. He wrapped me in a tight embrace that smelled of coffee and promise. "You're here," he said, taking my heaviest bag. "I can't believe you actually came." "Did you think I wouldn't?" I asked. "I hoped, but I know what you gave up." He looked into my eyes with an intensity that made my doubts recede. "We're going to build something important together, Sam. Something that matters." As we navigated through Grand Central's cavernous main concourse, Julian described the meeting he'd scheduled with potential donors the following week, and the workspace he'd found for us in Williamsburg. "It's not much yet," he admitted, "but we'll turn it into something great, just like everything else." I followed him into the New York evening, believing every word. I woke up to an empty bed in our cramped Brooklyn apartment. The space next to me was cold. Julian hadn't come home again. Sunlight streamed through the window we could never properly clean, illuminating dust particles floating in the stale air. 3 months. That's how long it had taken for our grand vision to deteriorate into this. I pulled myself up and shuffled to the kitchenette, stepping over the architectural reference books I'd stacked near the bed. The coffee maker, a housewarming gift to ourselves, gurgled to life as I pressed the button. My workday at Grinds and Grounds started in an hour, another 8 hours of making lattes for people living the New York life I thought I'd have by now. After that, I'd come back here and work on freelance designs until my eyes burned, just to keep us afloat financially. Julian's side of the tiny closet was nearly empty. His clothes were at the office, or in his gym bag. Our office was really just a desk crammed in the corner of this apartment, but Julian was rarely there. He spent his time at networking events in Manhattan, making connections, wooing potential investors. He'd return after midnight, smelling of wine and full of stories about interesting people who were just about to write checks. I'd wanted to believe him. The apartment walls seemed to close in more each day. When we first arrived, this Williamsburg rental felt full of possibility. Now it just felt small, like our relationship. My phone buzzed. A text from Julian. Have to cancel dinner tonight. Meeting with potential donor. Could be our big break. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, okay. After my workday, I trudged back to the apartment, legs aching from standing all day. I needed to finish a proposal for a small commercial renovation, one of the few design jobs I'd managed to land. My laptop's battery was dead, and my charger was broken. Julian's laptop sat on the desk, plugged in and ready. He wouldn't mind. We were partners after all. That's what he always said when he needed me to cover rent or buy groceries. We're building this together, Sam. I opened his computer and found his browser still running. A message notification popped up from someone named Catherine Lowell. Catherine Lowell. I recognized that name. Julian had mentioned her a few times, the daughter of an important investor. Just a contact, he'd said. Her father has connections to humanitarian organizations. I clicked on the message without thinking. Miss you already. Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see the new designs you're working on. Daddy says the incorporation papers should be ready next week. The message preview ended there, but it was enough to make my insides twist. I knew I should close the window. This was private. But I clicked to see the full conversation instead. What unfolded on the screen was the story of another relationship entirely. Intimate exchanges, private jokes, shared dreams, plans for the nonprofit, their nonprofit. Catherine and Julian's vision for transitional housing. Catherine and Julian's upcoming presentation to her father's foundation. My name appeared exactly once, in a message from Julian. Sam's still useful for the technical aspects, but your vision aligns more with what I want to accomplish. Useful, that's what I was. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Lowell Foundation Transitional Housing Initiative. There it was, a press release dated 2 weeks ago, announcing a new partnership between the Lowell Foundation and Julian Cross. The incorporation documents listed Catherine Lowell as co-founder and partner. All those extra hours I'd worked, all those nights I'd stayed up drafting while Julian networked, I wasn't supporting our dream. I was funding his courtship of someone with deeper pockets and better connections. I sat perfectly still, watching the screen until it went dark. Then I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the Brooklyn night. 3 months ago, I'd given up everything, my job, my apartment, my professional connections, to follow Julian here. I'd believed in him. In us. What a fool I'd been. With cold calculation, I returned to Julian's laptop and continued my search. I found emails discussing their upcoming trip to Jordan, paid for by the Lowell Foundation. Photos of Julian and Catherine at events I knew nothing about. Documents outlining their 5-year plan for the organization, an organization that had no place for me. I closed the laptop and looked around our apartment. My coffee shop apron hung on the bathroom door. My drafting tools were neatly arranged on the desk, the one professional habit I'd maintained in this mess. The stack of rejection emails from architecture firms was tucked in my portfolio case. I'd been trying so hard to find real work while Julian had been, stringing me along until he secured his meal ticket? I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I felt a cool clarity settle over me. By morning, I'd made my decision. I booked a train ticket to Chicago for the next day. I packed only what mattered, my drafting tools, essential clothes, the few architecture books I couldn't replace. Everything else could stay. I wrote a note and left it on his laptop. I deserve better than to be someone's stepping stone. No tears, no lengthy explanations. He didn't deserve more words from me. With my bags packed and my train ticket purchased, I took one last look at the cramped Brooklyn apartment where my dreams had withered. Then I walked out, closing the door on Julian and the life I'd mistakenly thought we were building together. I stepped off the train at Union Station, my shoulders tight from carrying my overstuffed portfolio case and duffel bag the entire journey from New York. Chicago's usual hustle and bustle welcomed me back, the same city I'd left with such grand dreams just 3 months ago. Now I returned with nothing but my drafting tools, a handful of clothes, and a determination that was shaky but stubborn. The station filled with announcements and footsteps as I walked toward the exit. Each step away from the platform put more distance between me and the mistake I'd made with Julian. I'd trusted him completely, uprooted my entire life for what I thought was our shared vision. Instead, I'd become a footnote in his story, a convenient source of technical expertise and rent money while he cultivated Catherine Lowell and her family's foundation. Outside, the September wind hit me with a blast of cool air that felt good. I took a deep breath. I was home, but I couldn't bring myself to contact anyone from Maxwell and Associates yet. The thought of explaining my failure twisted my stomach into knots. Eliana had warned me. Everyone had warned me. I hauled my bags to a nearby coffee shop and pulled out my laptop. First priority, finding somewhere to live. My savings wouldn't last long, but I needed a place to regroup and rebuild. By evening, I'd secured a tiny studio apartment in Pilsen, a far cry from my former Wicker Park place. But the predominantly Mexican neighborhood had character and reasonable rents. The apartment measured barely 400 square feet, with cracked linoleum floors and a kitchen consisting of a mini fridge, 2-burner stove, and a sink that drained too slowly. But it had tall windows that let in plenty of morning light, perfect for drafting, and exposed brick walls where I could pin up drawings and plans. It would do. I spent my first week back in Chicago sending resumes to every architecture firm in the city except Maxwell and Associates. Pride kept me from reaching out to my former colleagues. I couldn't face their pity, or worse, their unspoken, "I told you so." 15 rejections later, I landed an interview at Greenfield Design Group, a small firm specializing in commercial renovations. Their office was on the second floor of a converted auto repair shop in Humboldt Park, with mismatched furniture and blueprints covering every surface. "Your portfolio from Maxwell is impressive," Martin Greenfield said, flipping through my previous work. "But there's a 3-month gap. What happened in New York?" I considered fabricating something more palatable than the truth, but decided against it. I left to help establish a nonprofit focused on transitional housing for refugees. The partnership dissolved over creative differences. The understatement tasted bitter. Martin studied me over his reading glasses. "And now you want to design strip malls and dental offices?" "I want to work," I replied honestly, "and rebuild my savings while I figure out my next steps." He hired me that afternoon, not as a project lead or even a full designer, but as a junior associate tasked with drafting revisions and preparing permit applications. The salary barely covered my rent and student loan payments, but it was a starting point. During days, I revised floor plans for convenience stores and updated elevations for office buildings, but nights and weekends belonged to me. I set up a drafting table beneath the windows in my apartment and began working on concepts that mattered. Affordable housing that emphasized community spaces and sustainable materials. My tiny kitchen table became command central for researching municipal regulations, grant opportunities, and neighborhood development initiatives. I pinned maps of Chicago's underserved areas to my walls, highlighting vacant buildings and abandoned lots that could become something meaningful. This work wasn't for clients or for profit. It was for me. Each sketch rebuilt a piece of my confidence that Julian had shattered. Each concept clarified my own vision, not one borrowed from someone else's charismatic promises. Months passed in this rhythm. Work at Greenfield, then home to my real projects. I saved every dollar possible, eating rice and beans more often than not. My social life consisted of walks through architectural landmarks when I needed inspiration and occasional check-ins with Tess, who still occupied my old apartment. 6 months after my return, I sat in a coffee shop reviewing budget projections for a theoretical housing development when someone slid into the chair across from me. "I wondered how long it would take you to call," Eliana Vega said, setting down her cappuccino. "I guess the answer is never." My former mentor looked exactly the same. Sleek bob with streaks of silver, rectangular glasses, impeccable posture. Her expression held no pity, just the direct assessment I remembered. "How did you find me?" I asked, quickly gathering my scattered papers. "Chicago's architecture community isn't that large, Samantha. Martin Greenfield mentioned he'd hired you when we sat on a panel together last month." I braced myself for the inevitable questions about New York, or comments about my current position several rungs down the career ladder from where I'd been. Instead, Eliana pointed to my sketches. "Tell me about these." For the next hour, I explained my concepts for converting abandoned industrial buildings into mixed-income communities with shared gardens and workshop spaces. I showed her my research on material costs and tax incentives, my projections for maintenance and energy efficiency. "This is strong work," she said when I finished. "Stronger than what you were doing before you left." Her words made me feel better. I didn't know how badly I needed someone in the field to say I was doing a good job until right then. "The city just approved funding for a new municipal housing initiative," Eliana continued. "They're looking for proposals from local firms. Maxwell is submitting, of course, but there's also an open call for individual architects to contribute specific components." She slid a folder across the table. "The submission deadline is 3 weeks away. Your work would be a good fit." "I don't have a firm," I said, even as I opened the folder and began scanning the requirements. "You have ideas," Eliana replied. "Sometimes that's enough to start." That night, I pushed my bed against the wall to make more space for laying out drawings. I worked until sunrise, refined my concepts during lunch breaks at Greenfield, then worked more each evening. The municipal project became my obsession, a chance to prove my worth not just to others, but to myself. My proposal focused on converting 3 abandoned warehouses in Chicago's South Side into connected residential communities. Unlike traditional public housing that often isolated residents from resources, my design incorporated small business incubator spaces, a community health clinic, and rooftop gardens that doubled as job training facilities. When I submitted the completed proposal, I used my personal email rather than Greenfield's. This wasn't about leveraging my current position. It was about staking a claim on my own vision. 2 weeks later, I received an email requesting my presence at a city planning meeting to discuss my submission. I took a personal day from Greenfield and wore my one good suit, the same one I'd worn to countless presentations at Maxwell. The committee room buzzed with architects and developers from established firms. I recognized several former colleagues who did double takes when they spotted me. I nodded politely but kept my distance, reviewing my presentation notes instead of engaging in professional small talk. When my turn came to present, I walked to the podium feeling nervous but kept my voice steady. For 15 minutes, I outlined my vision for the warehouses, how their existing industrial features could be preserved while creating modern living spaces, how staggered rent structures could support economic diversity, how shared facilities could foster community bonds. "What makes your approach different from similar conversions we've seen?" asked a city councilwoman near the end of my presentation. "Most developments impose solutions on communities," I replied. "My proposal includes a 3-phase community consultation process built into the timeline. The residents of these neighborhoods know what they need better than any architect. My job is to translate their expertise into viable structures, not dictate how they should live." The questions continued for another 10 minutes. When I returned to my seat, Eliana caught my eye from across the room and gave me a slight nod that conveyed more approval than words could have. A week later, I learned that while Maxwell and Associates had secured the primary contract, the city had earmarked funding specifically for my warehouse conversion component. They wanted me to collaborate with Maxwell on that portion of the larger initiative. Martin Greenfield was surprisingly supportive when I gave notice. "I knew you were too good for strip mall renovations," he said, offering to provide workspace at Greenfield until I established my own office. Returning to Maxwell as a consultant, rather than an employee, created an awkward dynamic with my former colleagues. Some treated me with the cool professionalism reserved for outsiders. Others expressed genuine happiness at my return to meaningful work. Eliana maintained her mentor role but with a new layer of collegial respect. The warehouse project consumed the next 6 months of my life. I coordinated community meetings where residents reviewed and revised my initial concepts. I negotiated with contractors who weren't accustomed to working within tight budget constraints. I battled city officials who wanted to cut corners on sustainability features. Through it all, I documented everything, not just the architectural plans, but the process itself, the community engagement methods, the budget-stretching techniques, the regulatory navigation strategies. These became as valuable as the buildings taking shape. When the first warehouse renovation neared completion, a local architectural blog featured the project. That piece led to a small profile in a regional design magazine, which caught the attention of potential clients with similar visions. 18 months after stepping off that train from New York, I signed a lease on a loft space in the West Loop. The industrial space with its concrete floors and wall of windows became home to Cornerstone Design Studio, my firm, built on my terms. I started small, just myself and one recent graduate named Zephyr who brought technical skills I lacked and shared my philosophy about community-centered design. We took on projects other firms deemed too small or too complicated, converting a former parochial school into senior housing, redesigning a food desert corner store into a community market with apartments above. Each completed project built our reputation. Each satisfied client referred others. I maintained rigorous documentation of our process, creating case studies that demonstrated both the social and financial viability of our approach. When the opportunity came to apply for a sustainability grant that would fund a demonstration project in North Lawndale, larger firms dismissed it as unattainable. The application process was notoriously difficult, and the competition included national firms with dedicated grant-writing teams. "We should try anyway," Zephyr insisted. "What's the worst that could happen?" We spent weekends and late nights crafting our application, bringing in community partners to strengthen our proposal. When we won, the notice came via an ordinary email that I read 3 times before believing it. The grant allowed us to hire 2 more staff and move to slightly larger offices, still in the West Loop, but with actual conference rooms instead of folding tables. Our demonstration project incorporated new materials and construction techniques that reduced both environmental impact and long-term maintenance costs. Architecture critics took notice. Developers seeking to meet increasing sustainability requirements sought our expertise. City officials began recommending us for projects in neighborhoods needing revitalization. 2 years and 8 months after my return from New York, an editor from Architectural Digest contacted me about featuring Cornerstone's work in an issue focused on innovative approaches to urban housing. The photographer spent a day capturing images of our completed projects and our workspace. The writer interviewed me about my philosophy, my process, my vision for the future. When the article appeared, it spanned 6 pages with full-color photographs and detailed descriptions of our methodology. It made no mention of Julian Cross or humanitarian architecture or my time in New York. This achievement belonged solely to me and the team I'd built. The week the magazine hit newsstands, my email inbox filled with speaking invitations. Universities wanted me to address their architecture students. Professional organizations requested presentations on community engagement strategies. Developers sought consultations on incorporating our approaches into their projects. Among these invitations was one that stood out, a request to present at the National Sustainable Design Conference in Boston. The email mentioned that my recent feature in Architectural Digest had brought me to the attention of the selection committee, who believed my perspective would add value to their program. I accepted immediately, already envisioning how I would structure my presentation to emphasize the practical aspects of our work rather than just the theory. This would be an opportunity to connect with others in the field who shared my values but might approach implementation differently. As I added the conference dates to my calendar, I realized how far I'd come from that day at Union Station with nothing but my drafting tools and determination. I had rebuilt not just my career, but my sense of purpose. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but it had led me exactly where I needed to be. I adjusted my tablet settings one final time, making sure my presentation slides would show up right on the big screens on both sides of the Boston Convention Center stage. I felt excited. This moment was everything I'd worked for since coming back to Chicago 3 years ago. The conference organizer walked up to me with a clipboard. "We're running 5 minutes behind schedule, Miss Reyes. Is that going to be a problem with your timing?" "Not at all," I replied, making a small adjustment to my blazer sleeves. "I've built in some flexibility." The Sustainable Design Conference had drawn over 2,000 architects, developers, and urban planners from across the country. Being invited to present Cornerstone's methodology was validation that our approach to community-centered design had gained industry recognition. The current speaker wrapped up to enthusiastic but polite applause. After a brief introduction that highlighted our Architectural Digest feature, I stepped onto the stage, surveying the crowd of attentive professionals. 3 years ago, a vacant meatpacking plant in Chicago's back of the yards neighborhood was considered a lost cause, I began, advancing to my first slide showing the dilapidated building. Today, it houses 38 families, a community health clinic, and a job training center. For the next 40 minutes, I walked the audience through Cornerstone's process, our community engagement methods, materials selection, energy efficiency solutions, and most importantly, the financial models that made these projects viable. I showed before and after photos, cost breakdowns, and resident testimonials. Beautiful architecture shouldn't be reserved for luxury developments, I concluded, displaying a final image of children playing in the community garden we'd created from what had once been a loading dock. When we design with communities rather than for them, we create spaces that truly serve their residents while remaining financially sustainable. Thank you. The applause erupted with genuine enthusiasm. Several attendees rose to their feet. Questions followed, thoughtful, challenging ones about scalability, funding mechanisms, and community engagement techniques. I answered each one with the confidence that comes from having done the work, made the mistakes, and found the solutions. After the presentation, the conference transitioned to an evening reception. I stood near a tall cocktail table, engaged in conversation with two university professors, interested in incorporating our case studies into their curriculum. The integration of social services within residential spaces is particularly interesting, noted the older professor, a woman with short gray hair and intense eyes. Have you found resistance from traditional funding sources? Before I could answer, I felt a light tap on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see another attendee with questions. Instead, I found myself looking at Julian Cross. 3 years had changed him a bit. He had some new lines around his eyes, and his hair looked more styled than before. He had on a nice navy blazer with a white shirt underneath, trying to look casual but still important at the same time. "Sam," he said, smiling with familiar warmth. "That was an exceptional presentation." My stomach tightened, but my voice remained steady. "Thank you, Julian. I'm surprised to see you here." "I couldn't miss the conference," he said. "Sustainable design has become central to our housing initiatives." I excused myself from the professors, who nodded understandingly and moved toward the bar. Julian took their place across from me at the high table. "I followed your work," he continued. "The architectural digest piece was impressive. You've built something remarkable with Cornerstone." He knew just what to say. He was nice about my work without going overboard and didn't bring up anything about our history. Classic Julian. "How have you been?" I asked, more out of social protocol than genuine interest. He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I once found endearing. "Challenging few years, to be honest. The nonprofit sector isn't what I expected." "And Catherine?" I kept my tone neutral, though saying her name aloud felt strange after all this time. "Still involved," he replied, looking momentarily uncomfortable. "The Lowell Foundation remains our primary supporter, but we've had to scale back our international ambitions. Turns out refugee housing initiatives require more technical expertise than we anticipated." I nodded, waiting for what I sensed was coming next. "Your approach to community integration is exactly what we've been missing," he said, leaning forward slightly. "The way you've structured those support services within residential developments, it's brilliant. We could apply similar principles to our transitional housing work." He paused, looking right at me. "We always made a good team, Sam." There it was, that smile that assumed I'd be happy about his little comeback, like I was just waiting for his approval again. The way he looked so sure of himself told me he thought our past was just a small bump in the road, not the complete life change it had been for me. 3 years ago, this would have wrecked me. But now, looking at Julian, I felt something I didn't expect. I'd moved on. The guy who I once thought was everything now just seemed smaller to me, not because he'd failed, but because I'd grown up without him. "Julian," I said calmly, "I appreciate the compliment, but I'm not interested in a collaboration." His smile dropped a little. "At least think about it. The kind of work you're doing here could be used internationally too. We could make a real difference together." I shook my head. "I didn't stay to build your dream, Julian. I left to build mine." He looked surprised. He didn't seem to get that I'd moved on and didn't need him to approve of what I was doing anymore. "I should get back to my colleagues," I said, picking up my glass. "Good luck with your projects." As I walked away, I felt good. Not like I'd won some big victory, but just content that I'd become who I needed to be. Across the room, Zephyr was excitedly telling a group of interested developers about one of our tech breakthroughs. Nearby, 2 other Cornerstone team members were swapping business cards with people who might hire us. My phone buzzed with a message from the Chicago office about a potential new job. Tomorrow we'd fly back to keep doing what we do, turning old, abandoned buildings into homes, fixing up neighborhoods, building communities. I had a lot waiting for me ahead, projects to tackle, problems to solve, and wins to celebrate. All stuff I'd made happen myself.